All right, welcome in another episode of Another Carolina Podcast. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler. You can catch me weekdays from 12 to 1 on the home of the Gamecocks 107.5 The Game. With me, as always, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark. Full slate today, a lot of recruiting topics, and we're actually going to finally get to your questions because not only did Wes remember to post a thread, but he remembered that he posted the thread. So we're going to go ahead and get to your questions sort of towards the end of the podcast. So thanks to everyone that has submitted one on the thread on Gamecock Central. And before we jump into our first recruiting topic, I want to remind you guys to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us a lot. And if you like what we do and you want to hear more of it, that really, really helps us. I also want to remind you to sign up for the Gamecock Central newsletter, which is totally free and totally awesome. And it's the first thing I do every day is I wake up and I check it, and it's in my email. And it's just a great way to stay up to date on all the Gamecock things that are going on. So without further ado, first recruiting topic. This has been sort of, I think, the thing that people have been most interested in talking about around town for the last couple of weeks. Want to get an update from you guys. Clemson running back, now former Clemson running back, Tavien Feaster, who graduated from Clemson, has put his name into the transfer portal, is going to be a graduate transfer somewhere, and South Carolina offered him sometime last week. And so there's been a lot of discussion about not only where Feaster would like to end up. Obviously, Carolina's interest in Feaster is legitimate, or they wouldn't have offered him a scholarship, but also sort of what he could bring to the table for a running back room in Carolina that has really underachieved over the last couple of years. So first things first, are you guys hearing anything from Feaster's camp about his interest in the Gamecocks?
Yeah, I mean, this is one in which I think the stars are sort of aligning for South Carolina. There's a lot to like for someone like Tavien Feaster about South Carolina's situation, whether you consider a variety of factors. I mean, proximity to home obviously is one. This is a guy who's from Spartanburg. It's a short distance from home for him to finish out his college career. South Carolina's running back situation is far from settled. They don't have the established number one back. There's a lot of questions going into the summer and then preseason camp in the 2019 season about who's going to be the lead guy. Feaster's a guy who's leaving a situation at Clemson, a very good program, obviously, where he's had some success in spots. Because he's looking for a place to showcase his talents more. So when you look at that, you got to consider, okay, what are some places that make sense? And South Carolina just happens to be one of them. I think he's going to continue going through the process. He's got to finish up some classes this summer, so he won't be able to enroll anywhere until August. But there's just a lot of things to like about South Carolina's position, and the mutual interest is really heavy here.
And how much would that actually help Carolina? Because I've seen that hotly debated on Twitter. I sort of fall into the camp that Carolina needs someone to pick up a third and a fourth and one. And even if Feaster's not going to come here and get, 200 carries and be a 1,000-yard back for Carolina necessarily, he's not going to be a Heisman finalist here. But if Carolina can get someone to pick up a third and a fourth and a third and one or a fourth and one, that significantly improves their offense. It's such a little thing, but it's a little thing that I feel like really hurt Carolina at times last year, not being able to pick up those short yardage situations.
They need that, but, even aside from that, I think you sense a lot of frustration from Will Muschamp and the coaching staff about South Carolina having the box blocked, which is tough to do in the SEC and even the non-conference opponents like Clemson that South Carolina plays every year. And they get it blocked, and then they don't pick up, like you said, Pearson, the 1 yard, or they don't take a 0 or 1 or 2 yard gain and make one guy miss,
right,
and make a chunk play. So that's one thing you look at Feaster when you look at his body of work. It's not like this is a 20 carry a game guy. Part of that is they've had Travis Etienne for a couple of seasons. Last season they had Lynn J. Dixon. They've had some good other backs at Clemson. They've taken, even with Etienne on the roster, a little bit more of a by committee approach. So they've had him as the lead back, but they've given other guys carries along the way. And so while he's not going to be the workhorse type, he does have speed. This is a guy with an 89-yard touchdown run, to his credit, against NC State. I believe that was last season. He's had some other big runs in his career. He's got a lot of speed. He's got some size. You look back at some of the plays he's made, he's capable of bouncing off some tackles and things like that. So they want to increase the competition, but also bring in a guy who has the skill set to walk on campus and potentially be that top guy immediately. Now, healthy Rico Dowdle, in my opinion, can have something to say about that, but that's going to be a question mark until further notice.
Wes, if you had to bet your life on it today, will Feaster be playing running back for South Carolina in 2019-2020?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm betting my life, I'd say yes. And to me, it's very simple. Like, we can get caught up, like you said, on Twitter or on the Insiders Forum about this is a former Clemson player, and this whole thing of, I've seen some takes about, I don't want anybody from Clemson on this roster. And to me, all that's a non-starter. Like, that's not even remotely a factor. To me, it's very, very simple. Are you a better football team with or without Tavien Feaster? And even if, let's say Rico Dowdle is healthy for the entire year, is completely the guy we've all thought he could maybe be from the beginning, and even if Dowdle ends up being the starter, well, couldn't you benefit from having a number 2 even of the level of Feaster, if Feaster's 1A and Dowdle is 1B, and those guys can rotate, and you don't have a drop off, and both guys can give you some consistency. Then even then it's a positive. I think you look at the skill set of that group, and Feaster didn't have big numbers at Clemson. He didn't have big numbers in the passing game either, but I was looking back at some of his high school stuff. At one point, I think his junior year, this kid was 1,000-yard, this is in high school, 1,000-yard rusher and 1,000-yard receiver in high school. And I look at the fact South Carolina struggled to consistently catch the football out of the backfield as well. That is something we haven't talked about, but that gives your offense another element to have a guy who can consistently catch the football from the running back position. I think it's an absolute no-brainer. You bring him in, it brings more competition to that position. It even, you wouldn't think this in most cases, but this could actually help South Carolina's depth at defensive back, because it allows you to make the full-time move of A.J. Turner to cornerback if you want to. If you feel like A.J. is your third-best corner, which right now, before the freshmen, are in the mix, which they're, a bunch of those guys are on campus now.
And Johnny Dixon's going to win a starting role by the start of the season, so we know that's going to happen. So AJ, maybe put him at number 4, but your point is taken well.
Yeah, that was tongue in cheek, by the way, for those who
it wasn't. It was.
I mean, caught on to the fact that
a little bit, but he's my new favorite player.
Pearson has a man crush on Johnny Dixon, but I think that we're talking about, not us, but a lot of people are talking about all the wrong things as far as Tavien Feaster. Who cares what team he was on before?
Well, and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, to your point, it never hurts to bring in quality depth for several reasons. One, because Carolina's running backs have not been good. Two, because you lose Tyson Williams, and you're not going to have A.J. Turner there full time. So it's Rico Dowdle, who's underachieved, Mon Denson, who's never really had to be the guy. He's been the guy in games before, but we don't know what he would look like as the number 1 feature back. And then Deshaun Fenwick, who's got like 20 carries in his career. So it's a position
and a freshman in Kevin Harris, who
right.
You're talking about a
so
freshman.
It's a position that, we think about, these guys have been around for a while, but it's, first of all, no one that's really taken the reins and said, I'm the guy, and also no one that's stayed healthy, and also it's a little bit thinner than I think we imagined. So there's no situation in bringing in quality depth doesn't help you. But the thing that's so weird to me, people must just not be sold on what Feaster can do as a running back, because I heard none of this when Josh Belk wanted to transfer to Carolina. So did people think that Josh Belk is just that much better a prospect than Feaster, or did I just miss all of the dissenting opinions when Josh Belk came to Carolina?
Well, I'm wondering if maybe some of the Feaster stuff is because of how the Josh Belk thing maybe played out.
There's no doubt. Because you know how it is. Now, but you know how we cover recruiting, and now any in-state prospect who grew up rooting for Carolina now automatically is going to go to Clemson because Xavier Thomas did.
Yeah, it's
like everything is, this is going to be Xavier Thomas part 2. It's like, no, not really. I mean, Xavier
they're unique
was Xavier,
situations.
and yeah, it's different.
So, I think that the Belk stuff is still fresh in everyone's mind. Caleb Chalmers was at Clemson, then went JUCO, then South Carolina, and that didn't really work out either. So it hasn't worked out, obviously, with these guys that have left Clemson. But, again, I don't even think that's a factor. And, I went back and looked. I remember when Muschamp was hired at South Carolina, Feaster had been committed to Clemson for 10 months. So it's not like he just spurned Will Muschamp and his staff. I remember it was actually kind of newsworthy at the time. Bobby Bentley was by Spartanburg High School right after this staff got hired. I think South Carolina checked in at the school and stuff. And, Feaster, from what I remember, was committed to Clemson for a long time, maybe looked at Tennessee a little bit while he was committed, but really, for the most part, was just firmly committed to Clemson. There was no reason at the time for him to open it up and look at South Carolina. So it's not like this is a guy who, gave South Carolina the finger and said, I'm not interested in Will Muschamp's staff initially. Like, it was already done at the time.
And he's a graduate transfer. He's finished his career at Clemson, and he wants to just go play 1 year somewhere else where he can get a little bit more play than he was going to get at Clemson. So regardless of what fans and angry people on Twitter think, the coaching staff certainly has interest. It seems like Feaster also has interest. Do you know what the holdup is? Is he just like waiting to weigh his other options?
Yeah, I think, and Chris, you can weigh in. I think he just wants to, check out a couple of visits, maybe see a couple schools, and then to get the rest of the process out of the way as far as getting actually graduated from Clemson, because he has a couple of classes to take. And it kind of works out for South Carolina in that sense, in that, they wouldn't be able to bring somebody in until August anyway because the numbers. So, if he spends the summer getting completely graduated, sort of pushes it to August, comes in, fall camp starts, boom, see where it goes from there.
Would that be the scholarship that Josh Belk vacated? Is that how that would work? Would it count towards the same total? Or
So basically, South Carolina, for their initial counters for the 2019 class, they've used all 25. So in order for him
But Belk was in the 18 class, correct? His scholarship counted towards the 18, and then that was vacated. So would they be able then to like retroactively?
No. You can't. Once it's counted anyway. And Belk actually technically counted forward to 2019.
Okay.
Because he did the same thing that they would do with Feaster. They brought him in August so that they could count him forward to 2019. As far as we know, he played here. Like that, you still have to count. Like, you don't get that counter back.
No.
As far as Belk goes. He was here for a year.
No, it just helps you on the
85.
The 85 limit. Guy goes on scholarship, it's counted.
Yeah, so you have basically you would count Feaster ahead to 2020, and that's why you have to wait till August to bring him in. If you somehow went ahead and brought him in, he would have to count towards this past year, and they don't have any spots left.
Other big recruiting story of the last couple weeks, because it's actually been a couple weeks since we've done this. South Carolina getting a commit from linebacker Muhammad Kaba, 3-star according to Rivals, 4-star if you look to Scout, but either way, like a borderline, either very, very good 3-star or low 4-star caliber guy. Carolina beat NC State head-to-head, but he had a pretty impressive offer sheet on top of that, even though it did ultimately boil down to South Carolina, NC State. Saw a lot of good things written about getting this commit for South Carolina. What kind of player does Kaba project to be in college?
Well, can we just go ahead and make him a Gamecock Central 4-star? Like, do we have the power to do that?
We
both vote.
We work for Gamecock Central, and
I think
I'll
the kid's
email
a 4-star.
Shu and make sure, but I think Shu also would have him as a 4-star.
Yeah, to me, the kid looks like a 4-star. This is a bad dude. We've talked about how there's not a lot of linebackers out there anymore. That's something we've heard, that basically the kids who used to play linebacker in high school that are the size and athleticism are now playing defensive end, because high schools are just saying, hey, go get the quarterback. Everybody's in the spread. So there are very few guys that have size, speed, athleticism you're looking for to play linebacker in college that have the experience and the instincts playing linebacker in high school. And this is one of them. I think he's not the biggest kid in the world right now. That was one thing some people had asked us about.
Just in terms of he's skinny.
Yeah,
but he's pretty tall and he's long. He's like 6'3".
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to. He's like 203 pounds, I think. But first of all, that's plenty big enough to play linebacker in high school. Second of all, the days of just sticking 250-pound linebackers on the field and saying stop the run are completely over. And he's got a big frame, so I think you give him. He's got an entire other season of high school football. Believe he's an early enrollee, right? That was the plan, I think. We'll double check that. And those things aren't always locked in this early, but chance to be an early enrollee. And so you get him in a college weight program. This is a guy that's going to play, I think, at like 220 or something like that. And to me, that's plenty big enough these days. Like, I think we all get locked in this idea. And I'm bringing this up because when he committed, it was actually on Instagram of all things. Some of the Instagram comments were like, get this guy in the weight room, get this guy in the weight room. Like, no, he's perfectly.
And he's what, like 16 or 17?
Yeah, I'm sure he's 17 years old, I would think. Perfectly big enough to play high school linebacker right now, has a great frame, hard-working kid. He'll be fine. I mean, what did Sky Moore play at? Like, it's not you.
He was probably about 220, 230?
Yeah, I think at his absolute heaviest, maybe
Right.
230.
Right.
Probably a little bit below that. So,
But the range, the length, and that's why I just wanted to clarify when you said that he's not big. He's tall and he's long.
Yeah.
He's just not big. But, I mean, you're right. Like and I talked about this a little bit on my local show. The linebacker position has changed like maybe more than any other position in college football over the last 10 years. Jasper Brinkley, when he was playing middle linebacker for South Carolina, probably weighed more than half of Carolina's defensive line from last year. And that's not an exaggeration. It's such a different game now. You have to be able to cover, really athletic tight ends and running backs out of the backfield. And so, I mean, you frankly, you don't necessarily want a guy that's going to be 250, 260 playing linebacker. So you put him at 205 now. You say he adds another 5, maybe 10 pounds in high school. You get him into Carolina's weight and nutrition program. He's easily going to be able to get up to 220, 225. But what is interesting to me, again, I don't really worry about that stuff because that's going to take care of itself by and large once you get into a college program. But I've mentioned a couple times now the range, the coverage ability, the versatility, the ability to play a couple different positions. Like I don't know exactly what his coverage skills are, but someone that could at least be like a good cover linebacker, not necessarily nickel, but someone that Carolina uses in sub packages. And again, just like good commit. Not that beating NC State head to head is like, oh yeah, that's like big time. But you look at the rest of his offer list, and he had offers from Oklahoma and from Clemson, and I think maybe one from Georgia. Like there were a lot of good programs that were interested in this kid.
NC State's they've actually done pretty well producing NFL talent too, on defense. Especially. They had a center that just went highly, but defensive line,
a couple years ago,
linebacker, and in-state guys. I mean, they've done well with their evaluations on those guys. But I mean, Sky Moore played his senior year, his fifth year senior year at 218. Is what he was listed at. And then during the season, you always lose weight, so he's probably 215, or less. And Kaba's a little bit different type of player than Sky. I mean, Sky was just a stud. He could just do a little bit of everything. But I think Kaba can play any of South Carolina's linebacker spots, and he's got the frame, long arms frame. I mean, he can fill out plenty, and I think there's a lot to like there.
I like that he knocks people's heads off, man.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at his film, guys are going backwards. Like, this isn't a kid, and he's wrapping up too. He's not just going for the kill shot, but he's driving through people. They go backwards, and he's actually got some plays at tight end where he's catching the ball down the field, 20, 25 yards down the field, showing ball skills, going up over top of defenders. I think that ability to play in space on offense probably does translate a bit to what you're talking about, where you're trying to cover in space on defense. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but I think a lot of those skills probably transfer over. And, by all indications from around his area, just a good, team-oriented, hard-working kid, which I think fits sort of the blue-collar mindset of this defense, or as far as what they want this defense to be.
I think when people are making player comparisons, or at least projecting what a player could be, they tend to be a little overzealous or just basically project the most optimistic outcome for somebody's future. And I have seen people saying that this guy could be the next Sky Moore, and part of it is because of the way that he attacks downhill at the line of scrimmage. Part of it is his coverage ability. But what do you guys think is like a reasonable expectation / player comparison for Kaba?
Well, I know how much Chris loves making comparisons. So,
my absolute favorite in the world.
I was going to let him go first.
Shoot.
Chris Clark, the simile king.
No, I don't think Sky Moore is the comparison. I think Jamar Brown, who came in the last class, is more of a Sky Moore comparison just as far as coverage ability. I mean, Jabbar was a guy that, again, not very big. I'm talking about a kid out of South Florida, much like Sky, that covers well, was outstanding in camp. A Kaba comparison.
I put you on the spot.
We might have to think on that one a little bit and double back, because I don't really have one.
I can't think of a South Carolina guy.
Yeah, that's what I can't really think of a recent guy that really favors him.
Well, that's great.
Because you could think of some like Rodriguez Fitton, you can see a little bit of the Muschamp says Bryson Allen Williams. There's some, and you can see some of those things, but Kaba, there's not really one that just jumps out there.
Cool. Well, we'll get back to that, and if y'all think of one over the course of the rest of the podcast, let me know. Otherwise,
blurt it out.
Just blurt it out. Just say a random name, and we'll know what you're talking about. Other quick thing I wanted to ask you about on the recruiting front: do you guys have a latest on 2021 commit Lavacia Carroll. Did I say that right?
That's what we're going with. Yeah, I mean, we obviously like to promote our content too here on the podcast.
It's good content. As is this.
So I just talked to his coach yesterday, and we've got an article up. And if you want to read more about Feaster and the stuff Chris was talking about, he's got an insider report up as well today. But this was the first 2021 commitment to the class, which I believe, Chris, you went back and looked. Is that the earliest commit of the Muschamp era?
It is indeed.
Era. But I think that this is a situation where first of all, from talking to his coach, kid's an absolute stud. I mean, 6'1", 192, runs a 10.6 100-meter. Schools are recruiting him for running back, which is where South Carolina wants him at. Cornerback, safety, slot receiver, outside linebacker, even potentially. Getting back to that thing about kids growing. This kid's 16 and he's already 6'1", 192, and it's like, how big is this kid going to be eventually? But I from talking to his coach, I think there's still a number of schools that are still chasing him. And with it being such an early commitment, I think this is a thing where South Carolina will have to sort of continue to recruit him like if he's uncommitted. We'll have to continue to track him like he's uncommitted. He's going to visit Auburn at some point in the next few weeks. South Carolina was by his school for the evaluation period last Tuesday. That's Thomas Brown, who's heading up that recruitment. The coach, basically said that he is still sold on South Carolina, but it does sound like other schools are still chasing him, and that it'll just be like Muschamp talks about. It'll be a marathon as opposed to a sprint, but still a great start of the 2021 class. I mean, this is a national level guy. Alabama's after him, Georgia's after him, Auburn obviously. Notre Dame just came in and offered, I think, last week. So schools are not going to stop pursuing this kid.
And it's so far away. But it is nice to go ahead and get that early commitment. Where's Carolina recruiting him? Because, like you said, he can play everywhere.
Running back. Yeah, that's where they want him. Even with them recruiting him at running back, I still think you have to sort of put it out there that who knows, with it being this early, who knows where he ends up.
Does he want to be a running back, or other coaches in schools going to maybe say, hey, we're going to turn you into a 6 slot receiver, and that may end up being appealing to him?
I'm trying to think of when he committed. I think he is open to multiple positions, but if South Carolina's recruiting him at running back, that probably means they have an indication that that's what he wants to be in most cases.
Last recruiting question for you guys, the always unanswerable question, but I just feel like I have to ask you at this point. Do we have any update on Jordan Birch?
Yeah, I mean, with Jordan still going through the process, the 3 teams that you hear the most with him are Clemson, Georgia, South Carolina. Gamecocks, of course, got him on campus 3 straight weekends earlier this spring. I think there's a good chance that he's back on campus maybe by the end of the month. Again, in Columbia, a short trip down the road, obviously, for him and his family. And Georgia is likely, last we heard, to get a visit this weekend, a return visit. Clemson's still in the mix. There's been a lot of varying sort of info behind the scenes that makes it pretty difficult to sort through because it's a pretty quiet recruitment, but there's a lot of opinions and, so-called information that percolates sort of behind the scenes. So Wes and I always have to sort through that. But I think South Carolina, a lot of teams, I'll say this, would love to be in the position South Carolina's in. It's still hard to tell what's going to happen for sure, but they've done really good work. Will Muschamp's done a great job with the family. The rest of the coaching staff's done a good job with Jordan and the family. High comfort level there with the family. And have to see what happens. Georgia, Clemson, not going to make it easy on Carolina, but they just can continue to battle it out there.
You got to be optimistic if you're a Carolina fan, as much as this has turned. Like, it seemed like talking to people around town, everyone was convinced that he was just going to end up at Clemson, and that was the end of it. And really, I don't know, since March or so, it seemed like Carolina was a more legitimate option. It feels like they're sort of gaining momentum here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects to it. Number one, I think South Carolina has continued to gain momentum, but the other part of that is I do think for whatever reason, and maybe at one point the Clemson pool was even stronger, but I think even before, I think you're right, Pearson, it did definitely start gaining steam even more this spring, particularly, you get any kid, 3 straight weekends, that's a good thing, no matter where he's from. And so that definitely helped. But I think even before that, a little bit more behind the scenes, I think people were writing off South Carolina or saying, just sort of chalking them up to Clemson. And other college staffs were doing it too. I mean, so it's not just media or fans or whatever. But I think South Carolina was always sort of there. I think Will Muschamp had done a really good job of building that foundation with Jordan and the family, and has just continued to build on that. We don't know for sure how it's going to end up. I'm not saying these two are even exactly the same, but I remember at one time there was just always an assumption that Zach Pickens was going to go to Clemson. I mean, just always from Anderson's 15 minutes away. Clemson's doing really well, blah, blah, blah. And even when folks thought that Clemson was still in it, they were out. I mean, even though it wasn't out there in the public, atmosphere. And I'm not saying Clemson's out with Jordan Birch. I don't really think that's the case, but I think South Carolina has a lot working in its favor with this one.
The funny thing about that, too, is that I think at about that time it was Georgia that sort of became South Carolina's biggest competition with Pickens. I think they probably finished second with him, and now you actually have a little bit of maybe a mini push from Georgia with Birch. I think he's one of those guys, like we talk about, not a lot of information gets out, doesn't say a lot, but when you follow the visits, you look at all the visits to South Carolina, but now you look at a potential return visit to Georgia after taking a visit there earlier this spring. To me that says a lot too. So I think it's kind of interesting that both have followed that parallel, and we don't want to say that means it's going to play out the same way, because it doesn't. But just that, we talked about was Clemson early on, then South Carolina and Clemson, and then Georgia sort of pushes into that mix as well.
And he hasn't been to Clemson since last season.
Right.
So, I mean, you look at that and you sort of go, that's a little off. If he's definitely going to Clemson or some lock, that's a little odd,
Yeah, he did the slide a couple times, and then he was like, this is overrated.
maybe so.
That must be what happened. This feels like one that we may not even know until he actually announces. And I feel like that never happens. I feel like insiders will always know, even if it's just like the day of, they will know before the official announcement is made. But it feels like as close as his camp keeps it to the vest, we really may not know. But we'll have all the updates for you, as always, as these guys do. I won't. They will. They do. Chris and Wes do all the hard work, which is as good a time as any to remind y'all that if you're not subscribed to Gamecock Central, first of all, you should be. But if you want to be subscribed, if you haven't been a subscriber before and you want to check it out, exclusive podcast code GCPod will get you a month of all the insider scoops for free. And that's all you have to do. Again, it's an exclusive podcast code. So your reward for listening to this, in addition to just being, entertained and informed with, just amazing insights for about 40 minutes. The other added benefit is you get the exclusive podcast code GCPod to try a month of Gamecock Central for free. Other big story coming out this week, and we do a lot of Gamecock stuff around here, and this is not directly related to the Gamecocks, but it's college athletics, so I figured it would be worth us touching on, is the NCAA reportedly, and this is still a very nascent story, so we don't have much other than just some speculation and some vague outlines here, but the NCAA is forming another committee, a group with members from all 3 divisions of football, and including the Big East commissioner and the Ohio State athletic director, and a bunch of people to reevaluate how the NCAA doesn't, in this case, but hopefully will, compensate players for the use of their likenesses, i.e., in the NCAA football games, which we all, I'm sure, listening to this, know and love and have fond memories of. Guys, my first reaction to hearing this, because it's the NCAA, is just skepticism. But at least they're calling the meeting. Like, they could have done what they've done the last couple of years, which is just not even address it at all and sweep it under the rug. Are y'all more optimistic than I am that this will lead to something?
I mean, I definitely am. Because I think that they wouldn't be coming out having this conversation. They would, like you said, just ignore it. I think if it wasn't a possibility. The fact that, the NCAA put out a statement on this. They announced it, that they've developed this group. You hope that it's not lip service just to sort of be like, oh, hey, guys, we looked into this, but this doesn't work for us. But knowing how they tend to operate, I don't think they'd even be saying this is a possibility, and knowing that it's going to get a lot of people's hopes up with it not being something that they're going to truly look into. Now, I think it was sort of interesting. They kind of talked out of both sides of their mouth a little bit in that,
as they do.
They said they were going to examine issues related to student-athlete name, image, and likeness, and then they went on to say that basically
but they're not going to pay them.
In no way will they consider any concepts that could be construed as payment for participating in college sports. So I take that to mean that basically no school or the NCAA itself, nobody's going to be cutting checks to players directly. But does this mean that a local college bookstore could have Jake Bentley sign autographs and make pay him to come do it or something like that? Does this mean that maybe the EA Sports games can return and every player can get 0.1% cut from sales of the game? Because let's be honest, as much as we love those games, when you were playing as quarterback number 14 that happened to just be fast and an accurate passer
and did nothing but win.
Yeah, then you were playing with Connor Shaw.
Yep.
Or that defensive end, number 7, which Jadavian Clowney, he happened to be 6'6".
All the 7s you see at Williams-Brice Stadium aren't Sean Carson jerseys. Some of them are.
Yeah, so
all.
then
most of them.
You take the jerseys and the potential. I think the big thing would be to do endorsements for these guys. At least the door is open.
Right. Sorry, I was distracted by a mustache on television.
I was wondering what I said.
That was phenomenal.
That is nice.
So, point here. You remember when you used to log on to the game? When you used to turn the game on. It's been that long that I thought you had to log on to the game.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know what you were talking about.
Remember when you used to turn the game on and go to – this is before you could download the completed rosters that people like Pearson would build and put online for other people to
I wouldn't
download.
even put them online because I was
You did it yourself.
It's like NCAA 2007. I was in middle school.
Okay,
I wasn't playing online. That's how I spent my summer, was just making the roster exactly match Carolina's
But
roster.
you remember when you go on there and they would be randomly missing players, some of which were sort of important, or if you're like, man, Carolina signed this 2009 recruiting class, where is such and such player?
Yeah, no love for Quad Gilchrist in NCAA football.
Yeah, or even a player you thought was going to be really good, they'd randomly leave him out. So the players, would EA Sports have to do a better job of including everybody, make sure their roster's accurate, so that, let's say, we're all football players, and Pearson and Wes are on the game, and I'm not. Do I still get my cut just because I'm a player if I'm not on the game?
Right, I see.
I
would say
just not get my cut?
Yeah, definitely not.
Then do I have to sue EA and say
used.
I should be on this game?
I think that's all part of the conversation. I think in some cases, if as a group this was meant to be that's meant to be South Carolina's roster, that's meant to be Georgia's roster, maybe it would be agreed upon ahead of time, hey, every scholarship player is getting this little bit from every dollar that's sold on this game. Even if the roster isn't completely accurate, I think that would be. It'd
still be slightly problematic though, because then you would have people like J.C. Horn that would be drawing most of the attention to South Carolina, and you would have whoever the backup long snapper is getting the same amount. And I'm just anti-communism, which is what that is.
But first of all, the backup long snapper is probably not on scholarship, and
but would still be in the game. Probably, maybe.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe you said you're only maybe, but this is I feel like this is a much greater step into the conversation than we're at right now. This all will be figured out down the road.
And I don't know. I just feel like it's lip service because, again, what you mentioned, and you sort of anticipated my next question, which is, how are they going to compensate them if they don't want to pay them? Is it just going to be
No, I think the NCAA is saying we're not paying them.
Huh?
I think their point is we being the NCAA and the schools are not paying them.
See, me reading that, and again, this is part of the problem with this just being a very, very new and developing story, so I don't know the specifics, but when I read that, I read it as these guys can't get paid for being college athletes, which is exactly what this would be, unless they find some kind of like semantic loophole or something.
I took it as more like we're not making the payment for their participation in college sports. But if EA Sports wants to pay them to use their likeness, or Adams Bookstore wants to pay them to come sign some autographs, then we're going to take a step back and allow
Or wants
that.
to pay us for mentioning them in the podcast more often.
True. That would be a good one. But no,
a great one. Perfect fit.
But I think, you can get into now we got to pay J.C. Horn more than backup long snapper number 2. But at the same time, you're talking about like an ideal world, I don't know.
But they're going to do it. Why not do it right?
Because it's impossible. If you're gonna, what's your scenario? What's your doing it right? How are we going to
basically let payers get their own endorsements? So if you're Kellen Moore or Tim Tebow and you're going to be on the cover of NCAA football 13 or whatever years those guys are on it, then you get X amount of money, and the third string cornerback doesn't get any of that money because you were on the cover of NCAA football. You
just want to.
So
free market
a meritocracy,
capital.
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But so J.C. Horn's going to have to go negotiate his deal,
Or we can get an agent to do that.
See, we can't do that. He's not going to have an agent.
Or the school negotiates on his behalf or something.
So now every single player that's in the game is going to have somebody negotiate how much money they're getting based on.
Sure.
What?
Add another assistant. That's what the assistant does. He handles all the business inquiries for his players.
That just doesn't seem logical.
The game will cost $3,000 to buy.
Then the whole thing falls apart.
Some people would pay
business.
that, honestly.
But the whole thing falls apart.
But this is a business, and they have to treat it like a business.
Yeah, they're going to treat it like a business by saying we're giving every player that's in the game a certain amount of money because we are using their likeness in the game.
That's not a business. That's a socialism.
No, it's not.
It is. That's like the definition. It's like everybody gets the same.
No,
Everybody gets the trophy.
all of their likeness are being equally used in the game.
Okay, so in the context of like just the NCAA football game, but in the context of, like you said, somebody signing autographs at a bookstore, if J.C. Horn signs 200 autographs at unnamed bookstore X, there's no reason that
Adams Bookstore.
There's no reason that Rodriguez Fenton
They're ringing up a bill.
should see any of those profits.
And I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right. So just in the case of the NCAA football game, it should be evenly distributed. I'm okay
because
with that.
they're all being
right. But in general, there is going to be some differentiation between certain players.
But
that's just part of it.
Yeah, but I would also rather if you told me that the players could get nothing off this, or that all the players could maybe somehow benefit, then I would say that's much better than nothing.
I guess. And I don't guess. That's exactly right. That is better than nothing. But if you are going to do this, if you're going to totally overhaul the landscape of college football, don't do it halfway. Like, do it all the way and do it right. But again, I do not expect that to happen. But we will keep you updated as the story progresses, because again, not necessarily specific to South Carolina, but a very important
we got to hit
movement.
Questions.
Yeah, we got to hit some questions here. We got some. Thanks to everyone that submitted questions on the Insider Forum on Gamecock Central. We'll get to as many of those as we can here in the next 5-10 minutes. What's up first, Wes? Actually, I should be reading these.
Yeah,
because I'm the host. Yeah, let me pull this up.
Well, the first one comes from James Robb. As you're pulling that up, I'll get the first one for you. Chris Clark.
Here I am.
Feaster or Rico Dowdle? Who is the better every down back for South Carolina in 2019?
That's a tough one to answer. I will freely admit that I took a peek at these to cheat a little bit earlier, just so I could look a couple things up that I was wondering in that brain of mine. Here's an interesting thing. When you think of an every down back, you think of a decent amount of carries. And referenced earlier in the podcast that, Tavien Feaster has been a guy who's shared carries, really, more in his career with at least one or two other guys at Clemson. So you look at, in his career, I believe this is correct, he has one 20-carry game. He had a 20-carry game in 2017 against Boston College. 20 carries in that game, and that was it. the rest of his games, if you go through his log, a lot of single-digit carry games. I think aside from that 120 carry game is sort of an outlier. His next highest was like 12.
But isn't that part of the reason he's leaving?
That is part of the reason he's leaving. So I think what I'm going with is, the body of work isn't there as much to say, okay, this is a guy who's capable of doing it 20, 25 times a game. Now, do I think he can? Yeah, probably can. So, but we just don't have quite as much of a body of work in that case. I do think Feaster, all things being equal, if both players are healthy, I think it's fairly close. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's one where you go, Feaster's just head and shoulders better. He's a different type of back. He's a little bit more straightforward. He's faster straight line. Dowdle's a guy who, has some wiggle to him, I think. And when he's healthy, he's been pretty good. And he's shown the ability to have a bunch of carries in a game.
He's had good games against good SEC defenses. He just can't stay healthy and is inconsistent.
And he's been inconsistent. So, I think Feaster, I'll put it this way, I think he has the potential to be that, but I think it's just a little bit to be determined right now. I know that's sort of a cop-out answer.
You see how he avoided that? If Carolina's backs this year can avoid tacklers as well as Chris avoided that question, then
they'll be in good
they
shape.
will maybe win the SEC.
Oh, man,
there you
love
go.
That. That's excellent. All right, I got it pulled up now so I can get to the next one, unless you want to wait on Feaster. But
real quick, I was just going to say, I think we have this habit of, if Feaster comes in, then that means these other guys aren't any good, or that we can't. But I think if you're South Carolina, you need them both. This is the running back position. Every team in America has injuries at the running back position. If South Carolina's going to be good on offense, for one, they still have to find a way to replace Deebo Samuel, which I'm not sold that they can do. And then, two, they're going to need all those guys, I think. It's not Tavien Feaster or Rico Dowdle. I think it's Tavien Feaster and Rico Dowdle. Both those guys need to have good years for South Carolina.
How many guys got carries for Carolina this year?
Last year?
Dowdle,
Turner, Williams.
Tyson Williams, Mondenson,
Deshaun Fenwick.
Slade Carroll.
Slade Carroll got some carries. Jake Bentley had some carries. DeCarrion Joyner had some carries. Michael Skarnecki probably had a rush attempt in there. So, we're talking, it'll be double-digit guys that get carries. It's always good to have plenty to spread it around. Now, to go back to a conversation that a lot of us had at the beginning of last season, it's probably better if you do just have one guy, but you need more than one guy. So then it's okay if there's a drop-off after that guy. Also, y'all may have already run this. Someone may have already run this. This isn't revelatory or even that interesting, but I just want to make sure that when Tavien Feaster comes to Carolina and then has a really good game and then doesn't have a good game, they are the first with the Feaster Famine headline. I'm sure someone else will try to run that, but y'all need to run it first.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's already been run.
It may have already been run.
Somebody made that comment.
It's really easy. Yeah. It's really easy, but I just wanted to make sure y'all had that. City Life 3 wants to know, with Jake being the undisputed starter, do you guys think Joyner only comes in for Wildcat-type plays, or we use him in multiple spots like the Saints use Taysom Hill?
I first of all think that Joyner would be very good in a role where he played multiple spots, but I don't necessarily see that happening right now. I think he's more a guy that's going to play quarterback, maybe come in and take some snaps, like you said, in particular situations at quarterback. But, it sounds like Jay Urich is the guy that's going to play sort of potentially the multiple position role. But, otherwise, I don't foresee Joyner playing any other positions. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, I don't think so. It seems more likely that when he plays, we have said that they would like to find a way to get him on the field, but when we say a way, that doesn't mean, okay, we're going to put him at running back. It doesn't really make a ton of sense, we don't think, because, there's no indication he's ever gotten any reps at running back in practice. So, when you say Wildcat, you tend to think of running the ball 90% of the time, but Joyner's more of a quarterback. And so I think it's more just a specialty package. Maybe you give him some package plays. You let him go run zone read. You put him down in the red zone where he's more of a running threat down there. You give him passing plays. Obviously, he has access to the whole playbook. He's made a lot of strides in terms of accuracy and knowledge and comfort. So he can go in there and run the offense and facilitate things. But maybe they give him some type of scaled down package or just some plays that picking out the things that he does best and let him go and run with it. I think that's more likely than just saying, he's going to come in and just be a Wildcat quarterback.
Over under 1.5 quarterbacks with at least one reception this year.
Quarterbacks with receptions. I'll go
Over.
Over.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right,
are we
Urick
counting
and who?
Jay Urick?
Heck yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I'll say over on that.
All right, so who's the other one? Is it Dak? Bentley catching a throwback?
I mean, somewhere along the way.
Polinsky off the sideline? Oh, yeah, you can't do that in the season.
I'm counting Bailey Hart, too. So
Okay, all right. Bailey Hart and Jay Urick will both have a reception.
Even though
I
he
love
hasn't
that.
been in the quarterback room for
Chris.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna blow
Take away your
through
facts.
these
Come on, man.
last couple. We're gonna go lightning round to get to as many as we can. The cocky gas man says, "Who besides Kobe Smith can play the 0 or 1 technique to allow Kinlaw to stay at the 3? I believe he's more disruptive from the 3 as he's allowed to attack and not asked to take up space and blockers." I'll hang up and listen.
I mean, Kinlaw can play that 0. Rick Sandage would be one. I think Jabari Ellis has been more of a 3, but they might stick him in there. Kier Thomas more of a 3 because of his size. Kobe's definitely going to be a guy they count on a lot.
Yeah, I
in
think
that
probably
role.
Kobe and Rick.
Kobe and Rick would probably be the main guys that they.
They don't have that just necessarily one guy that's just 325 pounds.
I mean, Josh Belt would have been a 0 technique guy,
Yeah.
but he is no
All
longer
the way.
with us here.
All right, J.H. Johnson, 67. Which game are you looking forward to the most this season for Carolina?
I got to say Alabama game.
More than the Kentucky game?
Yeah, I mean, that's just going to be a fun weekend, man. Like,
With Hootie in town?
You got Hootie in town. You sort of hope Carolina, I'm not even sure who they played before that. You sort of hope they still, the season is still on track and that can be like, I remember when Alabama came to town last time, obviously different circumstances, but the buzz around the program and in Columbia was insane. And just, even from a coverage standpoint, like I miss that every single week just about that South Carolina had an SEC game for that stretch where they were really good. It was like a national game, because South Carolina was the team that was in the top 25. And then when they played top 10 teams, it was like one of the marquee games they're talking about on College Game Day that morning. Obviously, you had game day that weekend. Like, I miss being able to cover a team that's like nationally relevant as far as their games go, and that game will be fun. Plus, like you said, you got Hootie. It'll be fun.
It's Georgia for me still. Just want to see if Carolina, how they can compete in that game. Can they finally score that upset that they need to? So I think it's Georgia.
Cool. Chris, much better with the lightning round part of this
Thank
than
you.
Wes. One more question from J.H. Johnson, who hit us with a bunch of good ones. But again, we're going lightning round, guys. So what is one key thing that fans seem to forget/ignore about how hard rebuilding a team in baseball or football is?
One thing they ignore.
Tough lightning round question.
Yeah,
That's like a long answer. But I would just say that, first of all, I think with the SEC especially, is when people get excited, we're getting these 4 stars and, we got this 5-star and stuff like that. If you look around the league, most of the other teams in the SEC are getting similar players. So, like, everybody thinks if you just have, like, a good class or two, that means, now we're going to compete in the SEC East. Well, most of the teams that you're playing against have gotten some similar classes along the way. And the difference in those classes is probably like 2 or 3 players. And if those 2 or 3 players either pan out or don't pan out, it affects who had the better class or not. So I think the fact that most football games within conference probably come down to like less than a quarter. Like if you just like divided it out, less than a quarter's worth of plays determine who wins or loses the game. And so very small margin for error, and you really have to stack, unless you're already at just a great place, if it's a complete rebuild, you really just have to stack 2, 3, 4 classes on top of each other before you really have a true rebuild.
I think people just don't do context well in general. So I think I would apply that to this as well. I mean, so like when you think of South Carolina and you think of quote-unquote rebuilding, well, in this case, rebuilding is just trying to get competitive and trying to get to Atlanta. I mean, South Carolina only made it to Atlanta once and lost. And that wasn't even the best football team they've ever had. That was 2012, and they didn't make it to Atlanta. So you also look at the fact that South Carolina, in the course of their rebuilding, you don't look at them as a team like Clemson, who, won a national title in 1981, had some pockets of success other than that, some pockets of not so good, and now they're back where they are. They had that in the past. Georgia won a national title in 1980. Then they built up to where they haven't gotten there, but they've been close, and they've gotten to Atlanta, and they've won the SEC. Florida has been to the top of the mountain several times, then they've slipped, and then they got back up. And even they've had some struggles along the way. So I think it's just context. And then you look at, like, if you're applying it to South Carolina, well, they're trying to rebuild or just build. They're just trying to get to the point where they can get that first, say, conference title or first divisional title in 9-10 years. And they're having to do that while their two primary rivals in Georgia and Clemson are at the top. And so that makes it even tougher. So that none of that. Some people say, well, that's an excuse. No, it's just reality. It's just context. And I think that's something that people miss.
Context is key, folks. Last one, Bagel 400. This answer is going to contain some good information, but also wanted to read this because this guy's name is Bagel 400. When does summer football practice start? Is it voluntary conditioning right now? What's on the agenda for May, June, July as far as football training?
That's a good question. May Mester is a little bit sort of the guys are a little bit split up. For some kids, this is like their final real just chance to get away. I think part of the team, though, is doing Maymester. You had some of the freshmen are going to go ahead and go through Maymester, and they're able to train on campus and stuff like that as far as strength and conditioning. I want to say, is it June 3rd that the summer semester starts? Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, I think a lot of the other freshmen will report like right at the end of May.
Yeah,
other ones.
So June 3rd, I think, is when that semester actually starts. So then they'll start full-on summer strength and conditioning without a football. That's purely focused on building strength and conditioning the body, stuff like that. That's with Jeff Dillman and his staff. And then as the summer goes along, they'll have their PRPs, player-run practices, that start out with maybe 2-3 a week or so, and just sort of builds up as it goes on. And those will be run by your veteran guys. Jake Bentley will schedule them up. Probably TJ Brunson, I think, is involved on the defensive side with setting those up. And there's actually footballs involved with those, but there's no coaches there. It's completely run by the players.
Great stuff as always, guys. Wes, Chris, thank you so much. We'll be back next week. Thanks for all the questions you all submitted. Keep submitting them. We'll try to get to any that we miss in the following weeks. We'll also post another thread for any more questions. So sorry if we didn't get to your question today. Remember, again, if you like what you hear, you want us to do more of it, rate, review, subscribe, and give us your feedback if we go for too long, if we don't do this enough, if we don't focus on the right things. Just let us know. He's at GC Chris Clark. He's at Wes Mitchell GC. I'm at Pearson Fowler on Twitter. Give us some feedback. Also, subscribe to the Gamecock Central newsletter. That's totally free. And if you are not a subscriber to Gamecock Central and you want to be, use code GCPOD to get a month of all the insider goodies for free. That's awesome. That's all you have to do. Great stuff as always, guys. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week.